Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ismail American. I'm presently the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Master University. I was formerly the Director General of Health of Malaysia, as well as President of the Malaysian Medical Council. So it's my honor and privilege this morning to be moderating this very, very interesting session. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure all of you know what vaccines are all about, but just so that we are on the same page, I thought I'll give you a couple of slides just to make sure that we are talking the same language. Now, vaccine is actually a biological preparation that improves immunity to a particular disease. Typically contains an agent resembling a disease-causing microorganism, often made from weakened or killed forms of the microbe, its toxins, or one of its surface proteins. It stimulates the body's immune system to recognize agent as foreign, destroy it, and remember it, so that the immune system can more easily recognize and destroy any of these microorganisms that it later encounters. There are about 30 common vaccine-preventable diseases. You can see some of them on the slide. And what are the benefits of vaccines? Many. Amongst them will be eradication of disease altogether. This is the case with smallpox, as you all know. Disease elimination as well. Reduction of mortality, morbidity, and complications, not just to the individual, but also to the society at large. It lessens disease severity. It prevents infection. It can also prevent cancer. For instance, in liver cancer, if you are vaccinated against hepatitis B, you will be protected against hepatitis B-associated liver cancer. It extends life expectancy, gives you safe travel and mobility if you're protected with vaccines, promote economic growth, and of course, enhance equity. So just to focus on prevention itself, now it's definitely cheaper to prevent a disease than to treat it. I'm sure you all agree with me. Vaccines protect not only the individual, but the entire communities. It is indeed an essential public health tool. And with vaccines, we can achieve the MDG goal number 4, which is to reduce by 2/3 between 1990 and 2015 the under 5-year mortality rate. Of course, there are many challenges. Now, WHO's ultimate goal is for countries to be self-reliant, to regulate the safety and quality of their own products. And most vaccine centers must look or strive for pre-qualification from WHO, because that will give an assurance that the vaccines are safe, effective, and suit the needs of developing countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is a huge potential for halal vaccines. Now, ensure that vaccine benefits are enjoyed by all Muslim countries without fear, without suspicion, or without doubts. And this, of course, can ensure equity and uphold human rights for every individual to enjoy good health and contribute to society and the nation at large. Of course, there are prerequisites for halal vaccines. It has to be of great quality. It cannot be inferior to the vaccines that are presently available now, at least. It has to be safe, convenient to administer, acceptable to Muslim countries, and of course, affordable. But ladies and gentlemen, there are numerous challenges, I feel, with halal vaccines. And this is something that we can discuss later in the masterclass. The first thing, of course, is the definition of halal. What is halal? It can be very simple. It can be very complex. And different countries may have different versions of what halal means. Secondly, addressing the Muslim suspicion of vaccines. You all know the story of polio. Polio is still rampant in Pakistan and the northern part of Nigeria, simply because the community there is very suspicious of vaccines. So if you have a halal vaccine, you can eliminate this suspicion and perhaps one day eradicate polio from this planet. The third thing is addressing differences in standards and regulations. All the vaccines that you have, halal or otherwise, there must be similar standards and regulations. But of course, this can be very challenging because different countries have got different regulations. So we need to not to compromise, we need to agree to support standardization and regulations that can be accepted by all. And then, of course, if you have halal vaccine, you will make the case for universal access to immunization using halal vaccines. And the other challenge is you can take advantage of the increasing demand for halal pharmaceuticals and vaccines if you have halal vaccines on board. But, ladies and gentlemen, I must stress this again and again. If you want to have a halal vaccine facility, you must have an R&D facility to keep up with the competition. There's no point in having just the usual vaccines and not investing in research and development for newer vaccines that are coming up in the market. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is my brief introduction. We have with us two very prominent speakers. One is a true blue virologist. The other one is a very enterprising medical doctor. We have here Professor John Oxford. He is going to talk to us on the case study, a post-eradication halal polio vaccine, followed by Dr. Tabassum Khan, who's going to talk to us on the global market potential for halal vaccines. So let me first introduce Professor John Oxford to all of us here. Now, Professor John Oxford is Emeritus Professor of Virology at Queen Mary's School of Medicine and Dentistry. He is a founder of Retroscreen Virology Limited and Oxford Media and Medicine Limited. He has co-authored 2 standard texts, Influenza, the Viruses and Disease with Sir Charles Stewart Harris and G.C. Schild, and most recently, Human Virology, a text for students of medicine, dentistry, and microbiology with Collier and Callum, which is now in its 4th edition, published by the Oxford University Press. Professor Oxford has also published 300 scientific papers. His research interest is the pathogenicity of influenza, in particular the origin and nature of the 1918 Spanish influenza strain, which he combined with conducting clinical trials using new influenza vaccines and antiviral drugs. Now, this research has been featured on science TV programs recently in the United Kingdom, USA, and Holland, Germany as well. He was awarded Communicator for the Year for the influenza pandemic by the Society of Applied Microbiology and Top Communicator by the Society of Journalists, and was placed amongst the 1,000 most influential Londoners by the Independent and Evening Standard newspapers. He has recently been awarded a Doctor in Science for his research work on virology, and as a science communicator, and elected a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor now to present to you Professor John Oxford, who will talk to us on a case study, a post-eradication halal polio vaccine. Of course, it will be followed by the next speaker, and questions will be at the end of both the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor John Oxford.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, can I say how pleased I am to be in Dubai and honoured, actually, to be invited. I feel at home here. I like the idea of hotels having the old British Empire's 3-pin plug with squared plug, and I like the idea of cups of tea. And I opened up 2 newspapers yesterday at breakfast, which pleased me very much. On page 3, there was a detailed article about Ebola. On page 4, there was a detailed article about MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus. And on the following page, there was a very big article about polio. So it kind of gladdens your heart as a virologist to come to a country where serious things are taken seriously. I was impressed yesterday and pleased by the Malaysian Prime Minister's introductory talk. And he emphasized this area of the world 1,000 years ago, where science was like astronomically I mean, up in the sky, science. Astronomy was up in the sky. Medical matters were up, high standards, setting an example to the world. And I think his idea was that why shouldn't it be a game? Why shouldn't it be a game? And I'm going to use his talk as a subtext to my own talk, if you like. He was interested in primary education and secondary education, and I'm interested in tertiary education, because the three that go along together, obviously. I'm a professor at the Hospital of Royal London, so I do teaching, but I also do research. And I know now, even if I didn't at the beginning, you can't teach to a high standard unless you do research. The two things go together. So if you're going to get high standards of everything here, and indeed in my own country, the two go along together, tertiary education and research. And whether you like it or not, research is very expensive, and you have to throw money at it, and you'll never know what will come out. That's the thing. You could say it's a gamble. But in the medical area, I think those gambles pay off, and I'm going to come on to that with this polio story. So it's a very easygoing talk. There's going to be no text in this talk, but every picture that comes up has a message for you. And that's the way I usually do this sort of thing. As an example, just to start off on the high ground of a virus being eradicated from this planet, and do realize that only 2 infectious diseases have ever been eradicated from planet Earth. Only 2. All the rest are the same as they all were. They may be somewhat controlled, but they're there. And I think it's this threat, a very real threat, from the natural world of Darwin, that we have to contend with all the time. Nothing to do with bioterrorism. It's all to do with the natural world. So this vaccine, this is an ad, this is a poster from the smallpox era, a Soviet Union poster showing on the left-hand side the face of someone who's been protected with the smallpox vaccine, and on the other side, the person who had not received the vaccine and succumbed to smallpox. And that was a wonderful achievement. It was wonderful in the sense that the great superpowers at the time, Russia and America, worked together, even at the time of the Cold War, to come to do something together to eradicate a disease. And then we waited 20 years for the next disease to be eradicated, and that was rinderpest, a very important virus infection of cattle. That was eradicated last year. So those are the only 2. Everything else is still with us. But number 3 is polio. There's some good news with polio, and I'm going to use polio as my example, really. If you're interested in halal vaccines, which I am, and you see from the initial, my credential, if you like, I'm an academic, but I'm also interested in business. Otherwise, I wouldn't have founded Retroscreen Virology or Oxford Media Medicine. And I am a scientific advisor, as it were, and consultant to Pure Pharma. And the stated intent of Pure Pharma, and Jeremy is here, the stated intent is to focus on halal, in inverted commas, vaccines, and to possibly, hopefully, begin to produce such a vaccine in this very part of the world. And before I forget to mention it in the rest of the talk, I would say this, that no one should be content at letting anyone else do the work. You should not be content, and we should not be content in just letting the United States do it. And I've noticed in Africa with the Ebola, everyone's saying, well, where are the Americans and their vaccine? They should not be saying that. They should be saying, where is our African infrastructure? Where is our African science? When are we going to make a vaccine? When are we going to do it ourselves? Because after all, we know now, don't we, that where we all came from, we know we're all related to 99.9999%. Doesn't matter where you live, we're all the same. And you can do these things anywhere on this planet. And it's no good relying these days, I think, on other countries, because when the rub comes, they look after themselves. And the same with the pandemic. The countries that were making the vaccine, that's Europe and the United States, looked after themselves first. And everyone else, it was just too bad. And so that's the sort of attitude it does pertain. So to be on the safe side, I think, you need to have a vaccine infrastructure here to be looking after your own people. So this is a very optimistic picture. This is the last polio case in India. And this little child here missed the polio vaccine. I think she was ill when they came round to vaccinate her, and she missed it. And so she contracted polio. But she, at the moment anyway, is the last case. But the question is she going to remain the last case? That's what the question is. That was the polio in the top part. This is from my textbook. I just want to mention it to advertise it. Human Virology, as text for students of medicine and microbiology. I think our chairman mentioned the thing. At the top there is the polio, 10 years ago. It was everywhere. 20 years ago, everywhere. And gradually concentrated down with a huge international effort. Now, at the moment, the focus is northern Nigeria, India, that's red there, because this is from my textbook of 2 years ago, and we're now into the 5th edition, but India has now been sorted out, so it's no longer red. So the only red part would be on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And there'll be a little red spot in Syria, and possibly a little red spot in Israel. But the point is this. We've got it to this extent, but there can be hitches. There can be a last-minute hitch in this eradication campaign. And that's what we all do not want to see. No one wants to see that, especially children. So this is where the Halal vaccine comes in. You've got to start somewhere with a project like this, I think. And I think I'm proposing in this talk that we start with polio. We know that there's been kind of religious problems, if you like. There's certainly kind of problems of some sort in those countries which have led to the vaccination program with polio breaking down. And I can tell you this, in the era of anti-science, and that's my own country, and the United States, for example, you might be a superpower, but you've got a lot of people in your country who are anti-science, so do not believe in it. So in that arena, you'll have lots of people wandering around saying they don't want this, they don't want polio vaccine, they don't want that. And so as a result, in my country, the United States, and in Europe, the vaccination program has slipped. There's no polio at the moment, but the vaccination program has slipped. So polio could make a comeback. It really could. It would be much more serious than, for example, Ebola. Now, let me go back to the history. And in these photographs of the history, I'm going to put various points to you and pull the whole lot together at the end of this talk. Hopefully within my 15 minutes. I see the chairman keeping an eye on me in my 15 minutes here. This is a very historic photograph of Dr. Salk. Next week, the week after next, I'm going to San Diego, where his institute, the Salk Institute, is. And next week will be 100 years from his birth. And they're commemorating this day with a special day on looking back to polio, those early days, and trying to look forward to what's going to happen next. But when I met him, I worked with him a bit towards the end of his life. Just to give an example what he was like, when he got this polio vaccine going in the mid-50s, early 60s, when he would get onto a plane in the United States, the captain of the plane would announce to the passengers that Dr. Salk is on the plane, and they would all clap. That was the importance of polio in the United States. That was the importance of polio around the world. It's difficult now, I think, to appreciate it, but we need to appreciate it as we come to this final push. And there's one other very important point I want to make. When we get this final push, say we get it, say we eradicate it in Afghanistan, say we eradicate it in Pakistan, in spite of all these problems, and in Nigeria, say we do that, what happens next? Well, it might surprise you that what happens next is the vaccination program continues. It will continue for 5 years after the eradication. 5 years. Because we know this virus will still be present on the planet. It might be present in my laboratory. That's the problem with polio. It might be present around. So we cannot stop the vaccination program. And we cannot afford, by we I mean the global community, we cannot afford any hitches whatsoever. So if we could get a more acceptable vaccine, perhaps a more pure vaccine, perhaps a kind of a halal vaccine, if you like, I think that will benefit not only people who are Islamic, for example, but other people as well in a global sense. So I'm sure Dr. Salk would be interested. I'm going to see his son. And I'm going to discuss that with his son. I'm sure he would be the first to be interested in this sort of initiative. And the other person here is Sabin. So Dr. Salk, and you need to know the technicalities here, although our chairman has mentioned it, there's two types of polio vaccine. Dr. Salk's is where you grow the virus and kill it. And that's the killed one, injected. Dr. Sabin, you grow the virus, and then you swallow it. It's not killed, it's been weakened, live attenuated, weakened. But the point I want to make from both these slides, both of them are looking at bottles, Salk and Sabin. What they're looking at on that bottle are cells, monkey kidney cells. And you use those cells to grow the virus, whether you're making a killed vaccine or a live vaccine. Now, I know the thing about monkey. I know the thing about animal cells in Halal. But these days, you can get away from monkey. You can. You can grow these polioviruses in human cells. And I'll come back to that right in a moment. So those are the two vaccines. And I will mention one other thing, actually, while I'm at it and before I forget. What you can do now, and this is the moment when the World Health Organization is looking for new vaccines. That's why there's an opportunity these opportunities don't come all that often. And I think here's an opportunity for a halal vaccine. Just now, actually, there's also an opportunity with MERS, and there's also an opportunity with Ebola. When you get new vaccines being made, you can move into new territory. And polio is a new scenario, as I say, because of the 5-year program post-vaccination to continue vaccinating. When I was 11, just to recreate it for you a little bit, this is what we do not want again. And I do not want children in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Syria or Israel or northern Nigeria to have to make this decision. When I was 11, I was taken by a French family to a lake, Gérard de Mer, actually in the Black Forest, just like this. This could have been me standing there. And the dad was a doctor. He was a family doctor. And he took my friend Pierre and me, we were 11 years old, to one side, and he said, look, you want to go swimming, don't you, in the lake, Gérard de Mer? And we said, yes. And he said, look, there's a polio problem. You know what polio is, don't you? It's a crippling disease. There's a shadow of it on the picture here. It's a crippling disease of children. Do you want to go swimming? Do you want to take the risk? You will take a risk, because it's fecal oral. It could be in the lake. Or do you want to stand aside? And we decided not to take the risk. We decided to stand aside. But should you be asking an 11-year-old that sort of decision? The answer is no. The answer is no. So it's that sort of threat in the background. It was not a recent threat, because we know from the 15th dynasty, the guardian of the Pharaoh's tomb, that's 3,000 years ago, that was 18th millennia, that there were cases of polio then. So it's a historic disease. So it will be such a triumph to eradicate it from this planet. And this is the image of polio. Most of the children in these iron lungs died in those iron lungs. They did not survive. They did not survive. So this is the disease. You may be upset about Ebola, but I think polio is much more upsetting. It's a quiet disease, circulating in the community without anyone knowing about it, and then attacking the nerve cells, the grey cells, which then destroy muscle, either in the lungs or in the legs. And there it is. That's poliovirus. And this is a bit of virology that I want you to kind of grasp. This is from my textbook again. The great square thing is a human cell. The little virus is coming in at the top there and infecting that cell, and it reproduces in about 8 hours in that cell. And that cell will then, you see the virus coming out, will produce enough virus to make a vaccine. But you can circumvent that these days. You could take the nucleic acid for the first time. You could take the nucleic acid, the RNA, and infect a cell just with that nucleic acid. So for the first time, and I'm going to get slightly technical here, you could build a virus. We know the sequence of the nucleotides in poliovirus RNA, you could build a new polio that's attenuated, weakened, but you will then use it to infect a cell to make a killed vaccine. And so you've got a combination of the live and the killed. So if there were to be an accident in the production, the inactivation, you would still be okay because you'd made the virus, you'd made the vaccine with an attenuated virus. That's the approach that I would like to see started now, and I would like to see it produced, personally, to this very high standard that you could call halal, that would satisfy the Islamic community around the world and satisfy everyone else. This should be for the 5-year campaign. I've got 2 more things to say. I think I'm still just within my time. I want to summarize it for you. And I want to summarize it in two paintings. This is a Soviet post-impressionist painting. And it's called A Little Piece of Paradise on Earth. A little piece of paradise on Earth. And it shows a young mother with her child in the great Russian spring. Great Russian spring. She has her piece of paradise. She thinks she does. She's there in the wonderful time. It's post-war, 1955, when this painting was painted by Postov. Everything that's wonderful. But there's always a threat. There's always a threat. And at that stage, the threat to her and to her child was polio. This is the virus that we could deal with. We could deal with it. I think we will deal with it. But this is the big opportunity. And finally, let me summarize it all. This is the painting by WIEF, the most famous American painter of the 20th century. Every American knows this painting. It's called Christina's World. You go to the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. You go up to the 5th floor, you turn right, and there's Christina. And you stand by that painting, and I've done it. Every time I go to New York, I do it. You stand by the painting, and Americans come, and they say, look, there's Christina. There's WIEF's painting of Christina. But you could say, and I want you to say to you, what's this painting all about? It seems to be about a young woman, her back to us, there's a kind of a bit of darkness about it. She's looking to her parents' house off the top of the hill. I'm going to get 2 layers into this painting to summarize what I've been saying, really. The painter WIEF painted every hair on Christina's head. Every hair, even the grey hairs. Because he was in love with his model. But more important, from the point of this talk, he painted every blade of grass between Christina and that house. Every single blade of grass he painted. And that was because Christina is a cripple. And if you look at her right arm and her leg, she's crippled. She cannot walk. She crawls. And that's why she knows every blade of grass. She crawls to her parents' house. But that was 1948 when he painted this. And this shows the power of science that's transformed countries. Like it could transform Dubai. Not hotels, but the power of science. And only 200 miles away from this where he was painting this in 1948, an amazing discovery had been made. The 2 scientists who made it got the Nobel Prize. They took polio and they had some cells growing, just like Dr. Salk and Sabin. That's where they got the idea from. These 2, they grew these cells, monkey kidney cells, for the first time in the laboratory. And that weekend, one of them said, well, there's an epidemic of polio. Let's see if polio will grow on monkey kidney. Now, that seemed a mad idea, but they tried it. They went home on Friday and they came back on Monday and they found the virus was growing in the monkey cells. And then they knew, 1948, they knew up here that they could do it. They knew that polio could be solved, that a vaccine could be made. And they got the Nobel Prize for that. That is science. And there's one other thing I want to mention. Because the President, Roosevelt, had polio, you never see pictures of him, but he had polio. He was a cripple. The Americans, when they realized all this, you could make a vaccine, you could do it, they threw money at the project. And that was the March of Dimes. They threw money at the project. And with that money, Dr. Salk and Dr. Sabin made a vaccine that could eradicate polio. So I think from the halal point of view, you can do it. We can do it. And I think it should be done. And I think it should be done in this part of the world, not in the United States, not in Europe, but here, in an Islamic country. And then you can become, using this as a starter, producers of vaccine to high standard for the whole world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor John Oxford, for that very interesting discourse on polio and polio vaccine and making a case for a halal polio vaccine. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Tabassum Khan. Now, Dr. Khan is a medical doctor who obtained an MBA in finance and a PhD in healthcare management. He has had a distinguished career in healthcare and pharmaceutical industries, as well as management consulting for government agencies and international companies. He is the founder and president of Strategurus Consulting, which has offices in Dubai and London, and is also the managing director of AJ Pharma Holding, the first group to invest in a vaccine manufacturing facility in Malaysia. With more than 20 years of top management experience in a multinational environment, he currently serves on the board of 11 companies that focus on healthcare and strategic investments and has led organizations with a very successful track record. He is a member of the Institute of Directors and Institute of Business Consulting, United Kingdom. His experience or expertise in value management has not only helped governments and private organizations optimize their operations, revenues, and costs, but has been instrumental in defining long-term strategies and policies. He is an effective communicator with strong analytical and leadership skills and has been regularly invited to speak on various aspects of health economics, translational medicine, and disease prevention. He is also passionate about developing bioeconomy in the Islamic world with tangible outcomes in terms of health and food security. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together for Dr. Tabassum Khan to talk to us on the global market potential for halal vaccines. Dr. Khan.
Is this microphone on? Okay. So thank you very much for such an elaborate introduction. I was not expecting it. So the more he went on, the more I was embarrassed. But I'll try to stick to the subject of the day, which is the global market potential. The world is changing. Now, I was talking to my nephew the other day, and he asked me, oh, you're giving a presentation. Who's with you? I said, I'm with Professor John Oxford. He said, what is he? I said, he's a virologist. So he asked me, does he work for Norton Antivirus? So we are moving towards e-vaccination now on the computers, but we have to get back to the human vaccines and more so towards the halal vaccines. If you look at the global market potential for vaccines, the word market potential in itself has many dimensions. The first dimension of a market potential is there a critical mass existing there of the consumers? So who will be the consumer for halal vaccines? It will predominantly be the Muslim population. So is there a critical mass of the Muslim population around the globe which could facilitate and accelerate the development of halal vaccines? The answer is yes, because in 2014, the Muslim population is estimated to be around 1.6 billion people. And on top of it, you have demand for halal alternatives. You have a halal KFC available now. You have a halal McDonald's available now. So the halal alternatives demand is increasing. And there is more and more investments into this area. So it's very important and strategically essential to look at the vaccine side of it. There are $2 million questions here. And that is one point which people are very concerned about. The question is, if we talk of halal vaccines, will it have a negative impact on the current immunization goals? By calling something halal, are we declaring the existing vaccines as haram? That's the $1 million question. By talking of halal vaccines, we should not be treading into a region which should deter people from moving away from the primary goal of disease prevention through immunization. So, it is extremely important that while we were studying the potential of halal vaccines, it should not undermine the importance of current vaccines. Number two, it should neither entail the unavailability of halal vaccines to jeopardize the current immunization goals. Having said that, I go to the other extreme because bringing in halal vaccines, for me, on the contrary, creates a larger canvas where the current immunization coverage could actually ameliorate, could improve, could go further. Because there are certain segments of population where there is a mental blockade with the current vaccines available. So in fact, by working towards halal vaccines, we are opening up the minds, we're opening up the canvas, and we're opening up the approach to the children who are not being vaccinated today to be immunized, to save their lives, and to help them lead healthy lives. The next, it is very important, and Professor American very eloquently put it there, that the development of halal vaccines should not in any way compromise the quality of existing vaccines. It should be based, the development has to be based on two principles. First, they should exhibit at least what we call in the medical research terminology, a non-inferiority to the existing vaccines. And as Professor Oxford rightly said, that we are moving towards newer vaccines, so we should develop the newer vaccines on the halal perspectives, which should be better than the existing vaccines. We cannot accept a vaccine which is inferior, which can challenge the immunization goals, challenge the threat to the lives and health of the children anywhere in the world. So, what are halal pharmaceuticals? Because there are certain definitions you can find about halal pharmaceuticals. So they are drug products that do not contain any parts of animals that are regarded as non-halal by Sharia, like pigs or the pork component, porcine component to it, or any parts or products of animals that are not slaughtered according to the Sharia law. I'll come back to that a little later. And during their preparation, processing, handling, packaging, storage, distribution, they have to be physically separated from other pharmaceutical products. That's what is the requirement. And they should be, of course, safe for consumption, non-poisonous, non-intoxicating, all the nons, non-hazardous, according to the prescribed dosage. We tried to conduct interviews. This is a primary work that we did in different Islamic countries. So we interviewed the regulatory bodies, we interviewed the physicians, and we also interviewed the religious scholars. And there were different approaches coming out as a definition for halal vaccines. In the current scenario, the Muslim populated countries, pork-free and alcohol-free vaccines are regarded as halal. This is the perception. The first perception, you see, what is halal? Which does not contain pork, which does not contain alcohol. In the most Islamic countries, we could not find any clear-cut definition of halal vaccine. And whatever definition we put forward to them, there were disagreements that cropped up. So, in my opinion, the approach from the religious leaders was very different than approach from the medical leaders and then from the regulatory bodies. So the first and the foremost thing, we talk of halal vaccines, but we need, and that's a point to discuss, we have to identify what is a halal vaccine. We all agree to that and we can move forwards. I will skip the definition because this is quite similar to what we had for the halal pharmaceuticals, so take you a little forward. The only published guidelines for halal pharmaceuticals was in Egypt, which is standards 2424. I will not go into the details. Halal Industrial Development Corporation are here in the conference. And people, the screen is gone. So the screen became non-halal for a time being. So anyways, getting back to the market potential, let's look at the world pharmaceutical market. At the end of 2013, the world pharmaceutical market stood at about $1 trillion with a growth of about 2%. You'll need to focus on your left-hand side. You have the non-biotech branded ethicals, which is about 412 billion, and the biotech ethicals, which are about 180 billion. The vaccines fall into the biotech part of it. And if you look at the growth, the conventional pharma is showing a negative growth. The biotechnology or the biotech division is the one which is generating the growth. I will not go into the growth division, but if you look at the vaccines, vaccine market is to the tune of about $28 billion. So when you're talking about $28 billion, you'll see that it is dominated by 5 companies, which by 2014, you'll see only 4 companies because Novartis vaccines have been bought by GSK. So you can imagine that almost 78% of the vaccine market is concentrated in 4 companies only. Whereas in terms of volume, these 4 companies do not represent the number of doses sold more than 30%. So the volumes are coming from a different market. The pricing is coming from a different market. We'll not go into the detail. But what I would like to emphasize is that the vaccine market is only less than 3% of the pharmaceutical market. So we are spending 97% on treating diseases. And in terms of therapeutics, we're only spending 3% on prevention of diseases. So there is a disengagement between the two sides. So we try to develop different economic models to see that if there are halal vaccines, where would it go? It was estimated that the Muslim consumers globally, they spent about 70 billion on pharmaceuticals in 2012, which was 6.6% of the global pharmaceutical expenditure, which makes it the 3rd largest world market after US and Japan. If you put it as a consolidated market, the Muslim consumption pharmaceutical market is about 6.6%, which makes it the 3rd largest market in the pharmaceutical world. Then, if you look at the Muslim population, which we said it's to the tune of, so you have some discrepancies in the data that the reference that you take, but today India is the most populated country with Muslims, with almost 217 million people, followed by Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Egypt, and then you see a lower graph down there. So, as a common perception, these could be the most attractive countries for halal vaccines. If you look at it, how they are located geographically, you see that there's a huge cluster right in the middle with the northern African part, then you go into the subcontinent Middle East, and then you see the green outlets right towards Asia, which is Malaysia, Indonesia, and all these countries. In terms of expenditures, which are the countries which are spending most, in order to see which are the most attractive countries, so the highest expenditure in the pharmaceuticals is in Turkey in the Muslim world, which is almost 10.4 billion, followed by Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Iran, and the US, with the Muslim population. And what is very interesting is that the countries that you see on the population map, apart from Indonesia, the others don't appear in the top 5 in terms of expenditure on pharmaceuticals. So there is a disconnect where the resources are and where the populations are. So we have to keep that point in mind while we are developing or going forward to see the potential of halal vaccines. Then, if you even look at the importers and exporters, you see that, again, you see a disconnect between the countries which are importing and the countries which are exporting, except for Turkey, which is common in both sides. Otherwise, you see that, again, so there is still not self-reliance within the Muslim world where pharmaceuticals are concerned in general, and when we look, I will not go into the data because the time is very limited, but where the vaccines are concerned, it is even different. The other point I will very quickly make is that if you look at the countries globally, the countries marked in dark red which are fully covered by UNICEF. And the light red, they have a partial schedule of UNICEF. That means these countries are supplied free vaccines by UNICEF or by other donor agencies, which I will not go into the detail. But that's of importance because the consumer, the buyer is not the consumer. The buyer is the bodies like UNICEF, the consumer is the Muslim population within the Muslim world. I will skip that because of the time. I will skip the countries. Oh gosh. Okay. Can we have the screen back, please? Okay, let's continue. The screen is gone because they want you to look at me, not at the screen. So let's look at the drivers and limiters. What are the drivers and limiters? They took away my screen from here also now, so that's wonderful. So I will continue. Because we developed a model now based on what? I don't need this. We based the model on the population of Muslims within a country, number one. Secondly, we classified the countries as the countries where the state religion is Islam, the countries which are considered as Muslim countries, and third, countries with Muslim populations. Because you have to keep into consideration that the size of the market is dependent on the government purchase. Immunization is one segment of the market where the vast majority is bought through the government, through their schedules. So a country which has Muslim population but is not a Muslim state, it will never get into the policies of the government to put it on a permanent schedule. So we had to apply different weightages to different countries based on the kind of markets they are. What we did, because again, unlike other industries, the industry of vaccine is very much dependent on birth rates. The higher the birth rate, the higher the sales of vaccines. The more kids you produce, the more vaccines are required. So we took the total Muslim population, took the top 20 countries in terms of Muslim population, and we took the birth rate, number of Muslims newborn per year. We multiplied it, which I skipped because the slides were not there, by country. We multiplied it by the current immunization rates to tell us how many doses are required for those people. And we took the immunization coverage because there are multiple references. We took the WHO reference. And then we multiplied it with the recommended number of doses. And that gave us the potential number of doses per year of halal vaccines in the top 20 Muslim countries. As I told you, and we have to look at the pricing because we had to take different pricing for our model. So we took 3 levels of pricing. The first one, which are the UNICEF prices, where these Muslim countries appear: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Uzbekistan. Then the medium one, which was referenced with the PAHO price, where you see the list of countries. And then the European-based price, based on the French case. We could do the French prices because they are more, at an average, represent that. So only 2 countries fall into that. And as I told you, we took the penetration rates. Is it a secular country? The religion, state religion Islam, or it's an Islamic Republic? And we did a projection based on what we did. So based on that projection, the halal vaccine market could reach only $96 million, led by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. But this is in 2020, because we took into the consideration that if the first halal vaccine comes out in 2018, what will be the starting point for the halal vaccine? So that will be around $96 million. But if we move forward, we could see that from 2020 to 2030, based on the same projections, we reaching about $1.1 billion. So let me make a point there. the point is very important. We have to look at the need of the halal vaccine. The need, is there a medical need? Is there a social need? Is there a religious need? Whatever the need is, but the most important is the need in the domain of the healthcare itself, disease prevention itself. If the need is there, the second question that arises is, does it make business sense? It's very easy to sit on a forum and we discuss in all directions, and then you go out and nobody is willing to pay you a penny to develop a halal vaccine, and we come back next year and say, there's no halal vaccine. So it was very important for us to see, does it make business sense at the same time? So what I can say after this, because we have a very detailed study and we published a book on that. So anybody who's interested, I can give you the data. It's about 300 pages on that. But my time is off anyway. If I go like this, that means, they're taking out the air of me, So, in very simple terms, there is an opportunity to develop halal vaccines, and the Muslim population is increasing. So is the demand for halal pharmaceuticals and vaccines. Both authorities and NGOs are working to deliver universal access to immunization, and the halal vaccine could touch population segments that are, I will emphasize on the point, that are under-vaccinated or non-vaccinated. In 2030, the halal market could reach approximately $2.2 billion that makes a business sense to invest in the development of halal vaccine. It will represent a niche on the global preventive vaccine market, approximately 3%, which is estimated on the same model to reach $84 billion in 2030. There are several hurdles. Number one, in terms of regulations and certification complexity, as I said, there is still no agreed-upon definition for halal vaccine. Due to the long cycle of development, that's what Professor Rockford was talking about, so it is somewhere between 10 to 15 years, unless we take something which is already existing and try to see how it could be modulated into a halal version. Due to production and distribution constraints, because when we talk, you segregate the whole facility for halal, that means requirement for a lot of new facilities, which will only be dedicated. So is it possible? I leave it for all of you to understand and to contemplate in your own minds, and the high associated costs. So in one line, I can say, yes, there is a need for halal vaccines. Why? Because there is a mental blockade in certain segments of the populations, leading to under-vaccination, under-immunization, and even cases like polio, where have they cropped up? They cropped up in the north of Pakistan, Muslim, and the north of Nigeria, predominantly Muslim. Okay? So there is a social, medical need for that. We cannot let these kids, die or become with some abnormalities. So there is a need. There is a market potential there. It makes business sense, it makes medical sense, it makes social sense. But we need to be very serious in doing it, and we all have to join hands together, not just talk about it, take practical steps towards it. And there are teams working on that, and we can discuss it during the discussion. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. I think he has summarized some of the challenges that the Muslim population is facing with regards to vaccines, and he has put forward certain strategies, and basically we need all the Muslim countries to agree to the halal definition, and once you get a vaccine that is acceptable for all Muslim countries, only then can we think about eradication of, say, polio, for instance. Because otherwise, there's no way you're going to eliminate such a disease. Because you have to put these vaccines in the Muslim population. Because, as you mentioned many times, repeatedly, throughout the session this morning, certain parts of the world where there's a huge Muslim population, for instance, in northern Pakistan and northern Nigeria, huge Muslim population, but that's where polio is becoming a problem now. And why? Because of the non-acceptability of vaccines. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I want to talk too much. We will have time for some questions, I hope. So I haven't had any indication from the organizer to shut up. So let's have some questions. Please, gentlemen from there. Can you hit the mic, please? Yes.
Hi, my name is Richard. I work as an Islamic finance corporate monitor at Thomson Reuters. My question would actually go to Dr. Khan, and commenting on what you said, Dr. American. You said that some of the population in some countries, Islamic countries, are not taking vaccine because of suspicion. And regarding that, after the development of the vaccine, the halal vaccine, would there be any specific or tailor-made distribution channels, or would they be integrated with conventional pharmacies or conventional distribution channels like the Islamic banks or the conventional banks that have Islamic windows? And how would that affect on the elimination of suspicion, or at least reduction of it? Thank you.
Very good question. Dr. Khan, would you like to reply to that?
Because when you produce vaccines and you put them in the vials, they cannot leak out. So it's not that the sac tears off and spread out. It would be ideal if you have separate distribution channels, but anyway, vaccines have a separate distribution channel. It's a cold chain channel, and I don't think you need to develop a separate chain of distribution, because doing that, making everything parallel, because there's no risk of contamination. Once it's out of the facility, it's all sealed, so there's no risk of contamination. There's no doubt about that.
I think I would agree with Dr. Khan. One last question now? Oh, sorry. I've been asked by the organizer not to entertain any more questions because time is up. But please, you can, speak to the speakers after the session. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very interesting session on halal vaccines. I would like to thank the speakers, Professor John Oxford and Dr. Tabassum Khan, and also you, the audience, for being here this morning to listen to two very interesting topics on halal vaccines. Dr. Khan and Dr. Oxford will be available for the next hour or so for you to answer questions. I told you to ask them questions. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a nice day. Thank you.